Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, yes, thank you guys for joining us. Welcome to a Black Boys community. This is something that Albert and I have been working on because we found that there is something that's missing with the work that we do with Black Men Teach. I will explain further in terms of what we do in terms of Black Men Teach. But the purpose of this session here is that we want to raise awareness when it comes to understanding the type of inequality surrounding boys from African and Caribbean backgrounds. In addition to that, we want to empower parents and caregivers. We want to have a holistic development in the sense of learning to invest in our boys from beyond the classroom. And that could be through mentoring or third-party services. And then lastly, we want to address any educational challenges. It's more so a case of we want to make sure that every single one of us that is connected to a Black boy, connected to a boy from African or Caribbean background, is empowered to journey with them, especially as they continue through this academic journey. And I said that word twice. Off the back of that, what I will say is that this event or this discussion is not a space in which we are trying to build hate for the education system and those in it. I would be a sellout. I am a teacher. I am an educator. So is Albert. And so we want to make sure that we can at least bridge the gap because it's clear that there is something broken when it comes to a lot of the boys that we work with and a lot of the boys that we kind of represent. So just a brief introduction to myself. My name is Johnoi Joseph. I am one of the co-founders of Black Men Teach. In addition to that, I'm an associate assistant principal at a school in West London. My social is in Mr. J. Josephs, and you can follow me. You can engage with myself. I do quite a few things on social media. I am going to introduce Albert, but I've got a slide for him later on because he's also going to be sharing an aspect of it. But Albert is also the co-founder of Black Men Teach. So just a brief aspect of who Black Men Teach is. We ultimately are an organization or network that is compelled to create a space where Black men and boys can thrive in education. And so we do that through raising the profile of Black men in education, promoting and amplifying the voices of Black men educators, create a safe hub for men promoting positive mental health and physical health, raising awareness of certain types of inequalities, and then lastly, creating the positive experiences for Black boys within the education system. That is what we do. Every single thing that is centered around that mission. And we are very, very careful and strategic in how we deliver that. And to make sure that we are causing as much disruption and positive disruption and impact as possible. So let's just go straight into it because I also want us to use this time to hear from experts within their field. There's a range of different things that we're going to be talking about, looking at behavior and send, PRU, Black boys in primary, Black boys in secondary. In addition to that, Black boys in supplementary education, as well as how we can navigate this space and this dynamics between parents and the school. So in terms of what the research states, it's pretty clear, all right? So we had that Black pupils tend to have the lowest pass rate when it comes to GCSE English and Maths combined. In addition to that, 45% of Black 18-year-olds enter higher education in 2019, and only 8% actually went to prestigious high caliber. From that onset, we have been faced with this research, and we need to kind of ask ourselves, where is this coming from? What is the actual root of it? Because many of the research that we're going to be discussing is looking at the fruit of a lot of interactions and the experiences of these boys. In addition to that, African Caribbean pupils are often singled out for criticisms when peers of other ethnic origins are engaged in the same behavior, but escape punishment. We know about this, but we're hoping that especially at the start or within this event space or this discussion, we can actually start thinking about how we can maneuver that space. in 2006, the DfE suggests that Black pupils are more punitively disciplined. We are aware, and we will be very, very truthful with the fact that we have seen it, especially within our educational spaces. Black students, especially Black Caribbean boys, are 10 times more, are 4 times more likely to receive a harsher sanction than their white counterparts. Now, Grant and Brooks in 2000 found that the exclusion of Black boys from the education system has been notable. And this one blew my mind, has been notable since the 1950s and 1960s. Can you imagine a whole generation growing up facing this exact inequality? And so it's actually time for us, if we haven't already been working on a Black boys community and bringing people together so we can actually see how we can actually navigate this space. What's going on? We then have the idea that Black males are labeled as hypermasculine. Young Black boys are nearly 4 times more likely to receive a permanent exclusion. This was done, found in 2018. And lastly, the media portrayal of Black men as threatening is partly blamed for the treatment of Black boys. So I guess the purpose that we find, or the aim, or the summation, in how we find ourselves here is that from different angles, we have our Black boys facing or coming under attack. And so it's quite important that we are able to help navigate this space, support them as much as possible. And that is the reasoning behind a Black boys community. Albert, I'm not sure if you wanted to say anything regarding this one.
So Johnoi mentioned labeling on the previous slide. Labeling is something that I looked into a little bit. I feel quite strongly about, because it's something that impacts us as Black men, us as Black people, but then particularly our Black boys and our students in schools. I was fortunate to contribute to this Diverse Educators book where I spoke about the labeling of Black students in schools. Across the top there, you have some labels that are put on our students. So our boys, they're lazy, they're loud, they're aggressive, troublemaker, confrontational, violent, strong, etc., etc. And the list does go on. And it's looking at the impact of these labels on our young people. You know, some young people will take the label and with the support of their family, and history tells us that we have to work 10 times harder. We have to be 10 times better. We have to do more to receive the same acknowledgement as our peers, as our counterparts. So it's that notion of students from Black ethnic groups having to do that more, that little bit more to even get that little bit of recognition from teachers, from staff in academics. And that's one option in terms of the impact. Another option is students are given this label, and no matter how inaccurate it is, no matter how that label was given to them, they begin to internalize this and become the label, self-fulfilling prophecy. So teachers keep calling the student aggressive. Then peers start to believe, oh yeah, they're aggressive. Keep labeling as aggressive, and then they start saying, okay, I'm aggressive. I will be that aggressive person, whether it's in class, whether it's in sport. You know, sometimes the labels are hidden behind positiveness. So in sport, oh, you're the strong one, get in midfield, you're the centre back. So sometimes they can be hidden behind a positive message, but it's still the label that's given to the child. So it's just being conscious of the labels that we're using with our young people, and also as parents. You know, there's a lot of people that do a lot of work with positive affirmations and how we speak to our children and how the language that we use. It's being conscious that in some environments your child will be being labeled, right? Whether that's true or not, whether the label is accurate or not, they will be being labeled. So what are we doing to counteract this? Right, and that's the important. We'll have loads of speakers speaking from various aspects today, but that's something that definitely needs to be considered. The labels that our young people are given. There's quite a few books and things out there that I could mention, but there's there's work to be done on the language that we're using with our students, and then this links into how they're sanctioned, and it just goes off. And I'm not going to go off on a narrative because I know Johnoi is sticking to time.
But that's a really, really good segue into the fact that some of the work that we do, especially, so we actually go into different schools and we deliver workshops online and in person as well. And we always show this slide where we talk about a Black boy's story. And Dr. Faisal Dimi, in 2018, actually looked into some of the connotations behind the underachievement of Black pupils, especially Black Caribbean. And some of the things that was kind of noted was the idea of media negativity, lack of diversity, lack of targeted support, lack of parental aspirations. All these different factors contribute to the underachievement of Black boys. And it's actually time that we slowly start to address it. And we're hoping that this discussion, and it is just a discussion at the moment, and it will manifest into different things, but this discussion will encourage and empower the people who are listening to this right now, part of the Black boys community, how we can help them be successful within this academic realm. So in terms of painting the picture, then, as we kind of go into our first section, number one is very clear that our Black boys are having negative experiences in school. Number two, the relationship between home and school needs improving. Number three, the aspirations for some of our boys are really, really low. And lastly, number four, they are not being positively challenged or invested into holistically. And so you are going to be hearing from a range of different speakers, a range that has expertise in various realms when it comes to education. Ask as many questions as possible. We'll start the discussion off. But because this is only a taster, we've made sure that it's to try to cover a vast amount. We want to make sure that every speaker stick to their time and that you just engage with as many questions as possible. And they're here at your disposal, so definitely use them. So this goes into our first item on the agenda. We'll be talking about behavior and SEND. So this is, and I will introduce Mrs. Mellow Pascoe, who's currently an assistant head teacher focused on inclusion, Senko, and pupil premium lead. Excuse me. So Mellow has 22 years experience in education with an emphasis on making a difference for young people to achieve their potential, whatever that might be. She gained her teaching qualifications in Jamaica with specialism in mathematics and computer science, and later studied for the National Senko Award. As an aspiring head teacher of a special school, she has started the MPQH, after her first son was diagnosed as autistic in the spring of 2013. Her focus shifted slightly to advocacy and the career path in working with young people with special needs. Now, the educational experiences of many autistic children are not yet at the standard that they deserve to have the quality and dignified life. She has presented at numerous conferences over the last 4 years, and her sessions tend to focus on making reasonable adjustments for autistic children in mainstream, highlighting the differences, difficulties, and strengths of her autistic boy. So without further ado, over to Mellow, who's going to lead us on what is her experience with Black boys in their remit, and lastly, what is an advice that she can give to a Black boys community. Over to yourself, Mellow.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's an absolute pleasure to meet you and Albert for the very first time. I've followed you guys on Twitter, and just to say, in terms of my role as a specialist person, as a SENCO, and being a Black Caribbean person myself, I was looking at the data before thinking about how can I, in terms of a background. And my thinking went to this fact that there are problems within our community that we can solve, and some of those problems probably it's some of those problems we have created. And then in terms of why we're here, we're looking at the external problems, and how Black boys have been affected by the discrimination, the racism, prejudices, and so on. So when I looked at the data to look at Black boys in general, I noticed that Black African boys were doing much better in terms of not being excluded at the rate that Black Caribbean boys were being excluded. Also, that Black African boys were doing really well when it comes to GCSE. So in terms of this year, their progress aid score was positive 0.35, while Black Caribbean boys were negative 0.33. So for me, I was asking myself, what can we learn within our own community? What's happening in a Black African household compared to the Black Caribbean household? So internally, what it is that we can do, what's our responsibility, how can we address these things internally? Coming from a SEND standpoint and differentiating, is it SEND or is it just bad behavior? Is it just indiscipline, or does that young person have unmet needs? So what is SEN? How can we tell if a young person has SEND? A young person has SEND or need SEND support if they have a significant learning difficulty or they might have a disability. So a person who is autistic might not have a learning difficulty because they're autistic doctors and lawyers, but they have difficulties with social interaction and writing and so on. So they'll still be classified as having SEND. But when it comes to our Black boys, and I went to a training the other day, and what I found, most of our Black boys, when they're in primary school, they have the label of having difficulty with speech and language. Then when they get to secondary school, that manifests into having social, emotional, mental health. So I know that Albert spoke about a narrative, a stereotype of our boys being aggressive, probably being argumentative, lazy, and some of those boys, the schools haven't identified what the needs are. And so it's manifesting in a way that's presenting as being dysregulated with behavior concerns, or the young person doesn't have the vocabulary to respond appropriately. And so it's coming off as being a negative behavior. Within our own community, there's a stereotype and there's a... So for me personally, when my boys were diagnosed as autistic, it took me a while to share with my Black community on Facebook. I felt at ease sharing it on Twitter because the audience I had there were they were not really from the Black community. And I felt at ease that I could talk about them being autistic on Twitter, while sharing on Facebook, it was more limited because it was people from my community, people from my high school, and the judgment that comes within our own community. Some Black parents aren't seeking the support for their children because of the stigma that's associated with an SEND label. We know that head teachers, when they make decisions about students that they need to exclude, if a young person has SEND, then they have to, quote unquote, jump through a few more hoops before thinking about excluding that child. But if there's a stigma in our community and we are not willing to have an SEND label, that could potentially help our young people to get the support they need or to prevent an exclusion, then again, that's an internal problem that we need to solve. There are many other external problems. As I said, the discrimination, the stereotypes, and all of, so that's something that I would want to explore within this community. What can we do to really have a positive language when we talk about children with SEND within our own community? And what can we learn from, let's say, as a group, the Black African community? I'm a Black Caribbean. Why are they doing better in general when it comes to exclusion as well as achievement? What can we learn internally? And then how do we tackle the other external factors in terms of those discrimination? So how can I, as a Jamaican educator who is Black Caribbean, how can I support parents within this network if a young person is at risk of exclusion? What can I do to support? That's something that I would want to be able to do. Have I gone over my 10 minutes, my 5 minutes?
No, it's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Mellow, literally, you obviously when I reached out to you, and I love the fact that you're very vocal about your experience in terms of your boys, and also what you experience within your day-to-day job, and how you kind of merge both together. So thank you for being very transparent and honest, because I'm also learning a lot from seeing your story and what you're sharing. You touched on something quite important in the sense of this whole dichotomy between, or cognitive dissonance, between behavior and SEN. How do you actually merge it together? And so I guess my question to you is, what are some of the common misconceptions and stereotypes about Black boys' behavior, and how can we actually challenge and address it in the sense of it is behavior, but maybe it could be SEND as well? Where do we start that conversation?
I think we have to be honest about whether it's in discipline. So I'm going to keep it really brief. Growing up in Jamaica and growing up in a strict household, then we had to have certain discipline and certain boundaries. I've seen so many times where there's indiscipline that's being seen as behavior and unmet needs. So how can I tell? So if a child is misbehaving in lessons, and that person can access the learning, so we know that they're not having difficulty with the work, there's a good relationship with the teacher, and so then you would have an expectation that they would get on with the work. But at times, the young person who is disrupting the lesson also is not wearing the correct uniform, also is late. There are a number of areas that we're seeing them being indisciplined, and you can tie it down to this is bad behavior, indisciplined child, rather than a young person that goes to a lesson. The work has not been differentiated. We know that the reading age is 3 years below their peers. So they're reading at age 9, and therefore they're not able to access the learning. And if you're not accessing the learning, what else are you going to be doing? Probably distract yourself, distract other people. And so the behavior then that's being presented is linked to an inability to function within that classroom. So it's how the questions then that parents need to be asking. If a school say your child is badly behaved, they can say, well, okay, can I have an assessment? Can there be a round robin? What's the cognitive ability like? What's the young person like on the playground? Is this the same in all lessons, same environment? So there are many questions that we can ask and assessments that can get done to differentiate. Is this behavior being triggered by a learning disability, learning difficulty, or is it just someone that's indisciplined?
Yeah.
And indiscipline comes in many areas, and they tend to be not just in one area, it's in other areas.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing that. We have time to take like maybe 1 or 2 questions. Does anyone have any question that they'd like to ask? Mellow?
There's a question in the chat already, so I'll ask you, I'll read it out. So this is from Fina, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Is the diagnostic criteria / journey different from Black children to white? It says ASN. I'm not sure if that's maybe
Is that ASD?
Maybe ASD.
Additional support is the additional support needs. I think we use different terminology in Scotland. So.
Okay, yeah.
No, not really, because I work in Redbridge. So we're working in Redbridge. We have a lot of Asian and Black Caribbean. In fact, our white students quite a small proportion of our students there. And it's the same criteria. It goes through camps. If we're concerned about ADHD or autism, we then use the specialist services within Redbridge if we're concerned about dyslexia or any other specific learning difficulties. And even so, there isn't a different criteria that they use depending, but there has to be also cultural awareness in terms of how things are interpreted. We also know, this is a separate topic, that Black families tend to be reported more frequently to social services and so on, because there are misinterpretations around how we might present at school, you know what it's like, the dancing culture in Jamaica, the whole idea of certain provocative dancing, and then it might be interpreted in another way, which again is another behavior being displayed at school. So there are a number of areas where there's a cultural misunderstanding that might come up as this is a behavior problem rather than a like people that not understanding backgrounds.
Thank you.
I think just to, I don't know what time's saying, Johnoi, sorry, but I think just to add to it a little bit, I agree in terms of criteria not being different. However, the journey may be different. I think sometimes the journey, from my experience in my role as head of year, I've seen Black students or Black families having to go through a little bit more or for me to be that little bit more persistent for that assessment to actually take place, or for something to actually occur around that. Sometimes it's often put off to behavior rather than a SEND need, or to previous trauma rather than looking at the child's actual needs and their ability to engage in learning and the impact of it. So I think sometimes the journey can be different for Black children, but the criteria is the same.
Awesome. So I guess last thing I would say from yourself, Mellow, what is one thing that you want to say to the Black boys community regarding your area?
In terms of Mike, as a first, whatever is within our control, whatever it is that we can address, we have to be honest about it, and then we have to address those. You know, whatever is outside of our control, we have to come together. Like I can't tell you how much I am impressed with you and Albert in terms of what you guys are doing. We have to do more of this. We need more advocate. We need more people to be for families to be signposted to say, here are 5 cents because you think your child might have SEND. I mean, I'm happy to put myself down to have conversations with families. So we need more action within our community where we're helping other people.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you. I do know that you are going to need to step out, definitely to put the boys back into their routine. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we will be following up with that. I have shared Mellow's socials on the screen. Do reach out, guys. Do reach out. And I will be sending a collation of all of that. So next on the agenda, we have Kemi Olayinka, who is currently an assistant head teacher, also focusing in SENCO, but Kemi has experience working within a pupil referral unit. So without further ado, I am going to give the space over to Kemi. Do introduce yourself, do explain what is your interaction with Black boys within your remit, and then we're going to end with what is something that you're going to say to the Black boys community.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay, perfect. So my name is Kemi Olayinka. As Johnoi has said, I'm an assistant head teacher currently in an all-girls school, but I do have experience of working in a pupil referral unit for about 4 years. So just want to say thank you to Johnoi, Albert. Oh, David is here. Hi, David, for the opportunity to speak here. I know all you guys from a few years ago. My experience when it comes to Black boys in pupil referral units, 90% of the cohort were Black boys. And it was very disheartening because these were some of my brightest students as well. But unfortunately, due to behavioral issues, because there were special educational needs that were not addressed early enough, they ended up getting excluded from school. And something that I noticed that a couple of schools did, because I also worked in Redbridge, just like Mellow. And what schools will do, if a Black boy has been getting good grades, but something happened to get him excluded, they would put them in a pupil referral unit or alternative provision, but they will still dual role the student. So then, because their grades are good, by the time they do their GCSE exams, the school would get credit that, oh, you know, they've got their grade 8s and the grade 9s and so on. So these Black boys are academically able. A lot of the ones that I taught, the schools would get rid of them, their physical presence. However, their grades will still count towards the progress 8 and the attainment 8 of the school to make the school look good. And I found that they were doing the students a disservice because the resources that we have in a PRU is not the same as what they have in a mainstream. Another thing that I found from my experience of working in a PRU is that there was a cultural barrier. A lot of the parents who are from, you know, African and Caribbean backgrounds, they did not always trust, and I'll be very, very frank, the people who didn't look like them. And there was a buy-in that they needed to have. They needed to be able to trust the people who were working with them. A lot of them had been let down by the system. And when they associate the system with somebody of a white background, they don't trust them as much. They think that, okay, this person's not going to have my child's back, or they're not going to have my son's back. And what I noticed is that a lot of the parents, when they saw that I was the Senko, they felt more at ease. They didn't feel like I was just trying to put a label on their son. They knew that we were working together to get the underlying needs addressed so that they could get the support and be put back into a mainstream setting. For a lot of parents, as soon as they hear that their child has been excluded, they do tend to think that's the end of the line. And it really isn't. I know people will talk about the school to prison pipeline, but it's not always directly just school to prison. There's a PRU, there's an alternative provision in the middle of that. And the PRU to prison pipeline is something that we need to really try to eradicate, because a lot of students, when they are failed by mainstream schools and then they come to PRUs and they're failed there as well because they don't have the right resources, they end up, you know, going towards that kind of life of crime. Another thing is pupil referral units don't tend to have qualified teachers in them. Like I mentioned earlier, they don't have the same type of resources that mainstream schools have. A lot of pupil referral units have unqualified teachers. That doesn't take away from what the person can bring to the table. However, the confidence in what your child is learning and who's teaching them, it helps when you know that person is qualified in that area. If I was telling everyone or giving people advice around special educational needs and disabilities, but I wasn't a qualified Senko, people wouldn't trust my judgment or my professional opinion. So it's very, very important that even in these settings, these students still need to get the same level of expertise and support that they would get in a mainstream school. It's very, very important that PRUs are hiring, for PRUs to hire people who are qualified science teachers, English teachers, maths teachers, and so on, so that the boys are getting the same quality of education that they should be getting anyway. The language barrier was also something that I found. A lot of the terminology used in education, of course, we know the acronyms, ASD, SEN, SCMH, whatever the acronym is, even if it's different in different schools or whether it's in Scotland or England, a lot of the acronyms we do tend to understand. Parents who don't know or don't have the background in education, they won't always know what these things are. And that language, that terminology, it has to be put in a way that they're able to understand it and access it. I have parents who also have special educational needs, but that wasn't addressed when they were in school. And now their child is in a situation where they've been excluded from school, but they don't know how to really engage or access with this now. What are we doing to support the parents? When it comes to SEN, we talk about, that's child-centered approach, working collaboratively with the families and the external agencies. That's not happening enough, in my opinion. And especially when it comes to Black boys, they're kind of left to the side. Their families are left to the side to figure it out. The support is not there as much. I'm a very, very big advocate because from working in a PRU, I don't like seeing, I hate it when I see another Black boy walk through the doors. It's like, why? Well, I don't want you here, like not in a rude way, but of course I want them to be in the mainstream setting. I want them to get all the support that they need, but that's not always the case. There is a language barrier for some people. Like my parents, they came from Nigeria. Of course they understood English, but for some parents who don't speak English, the fact that I am Nigerian, I'm able to also speak my language to them. And it also makes a difference because then they're like, okay, things have been explained to me in a different way that I understand. I know you're not just trying to put a label on my son. I know you're not just trying to exclude him. I know that we're going to put X, Y, and Z in place and at least trial these things before before the next stage comes. It's making sure that the parents can buy into what you're offering as a school. You can't just, of course, there are steps to before you can even exclude a child and they're now in a pupil referral unit. But when we're seeing so many Black boys there, that is because there are underlying needs that haven't been met. There's that cultural aspect of it that is also not being met because a lot of these schools, senior leadership team, the people who make these kind of decisions on the board of governors, they don't always look like us. I remember I went 2 weeks ago or a couple of weeks back, I went to Mission 44's Black Education Summit, and someone mentioned that on the board of governors, there was a governor who literally said, oh, we might as well exclude this child or something like that because he looks like a criminal. That is somebody on the board of governors in a school saying that. And that just goes to show if someone has the guts to say that, can you imagine what people are even thinking that they're not saying? What kind of unconscious bias? I don't even think it's unconscious anymore. It's just a bias. What kind of prejudice and bias do people have towards our Black boys that they're criminalizing them? They're saying they look like a criminal or a drug dealer or whatever it is. You can't put these labels. When you do put these labels on Black boys, and for example, that governor saying that in that room, other people there will now start to look at that child differently. And when you're looking at that child differently, the punishment, like Mellow said, will be a lot worse. And I've seen it time and time again in a Peru, in mainstream, even working in an all-girls school. Black students, their punishments tend to be worse than their Asian or their white counterparts. And that's because of the criminalization of Black children and the adultification of them as well, perceiving them as older than they are when they are children, but you're looking at them as if they're grown men, and that's not the case. So my experience from a pupil referral unit is that we need to work with the parents. We need people who look like us in positions of power who make those decisions, because you have to be the biggest advocate for your child or your student, so that they know there's someone who is also fighting for them, because a lot of these children can't always articulate, what it is that's going wrong with them. If a student has social, emotional, mental health issues, they may not be able to say what it is that they're feeling. If there's a language barrier, parents may not always be able to say the support that they need. So we need to kind of bridge that gap between the schools and the families so we can work collaboratively to reduce exclusion rates and to ensure that if there are any other underlying needs, before it becomes a behavioral issue, we are addressing it and putting that in place. That's all from me.
Kemi, thank you so much. Just a lot right there. I think before we even move on, and before we even ask other people if there's any questions, you referenced the fact that many of the people that you've encountered, and I've also encountered within my head of year role, as well as being an assistant principal, is that many parents or families who don't know the education sphere, they will think that a PRU is the end, right? And you reference the fact that many people think that the end. What would you say? What comfort, if there's any comfort that can be given, why would you say it's not the end?
It's not the end because in my experience, I've been successfully been able to get students back into mainstream school, and they've been successful at reintegrating back into mainstream school. The problem is that parents don't always know that, and schools don't always make that very clear. When they give a student an exclusion, that's literally where they end it. They don't talk about, we can review this after 6 weeks, we can review this after 1 term. They don't talk about the support that the PRU can provide to make sure the child can reintegrate back into mainstream school. And I think that's the issue that we're having. It's not the end, but however, I do want to state, if the student goes into a PRU in year 11, they're not going back into mainstream school. So we just need to make sure that year 7 to year 10, we want to reduce those exclusion rates completely. We want to reduce them to be as low as possible. We don't even want them at all, so that by the time they get to year 11, they won't even be in a pupil referral unit. They can just stay in mainstream education.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kelly. There's a question from the chat. So it's from Ethan. The question is, how would you advise other teachers and parents to challenge some of the biases you shared?
How would I advise other teachers? First of all, if we're doing a team around a family meeting or a team around a child meeting, please ensure that you always start off with a positive. Of course, I know a lot of teachers do that, but then when we have those positive aspects, when we speak about the child, we're planting a different type of seed rather than saying the negative things first. I think it's also very, very important that when you explain things to parents, that follow-up is there. You're saying things face-to-face or virtually, but make sure things are written down so that they know what was discussed in the meeting. What is something that I can, so then if they do need to challenge it, they have the script there, they have what was written, and they can say, no, X, Y, and Z, I need to come back with this because this is not right. And I would also say that another way to challenge those biases is by making sure I know it's difficult because a lot of the parents that I used to work with, they were working really long hours. They weren't just working, part-time or something, they were working very long hours, but you have to get to know the teachers that your child that teach your child, because there may be a good relationship that your child has with their science teacher or their math teacher, somebody who can also advocate for that for your son, and they can give a different perspective. I've been in rooms where everyone has this negative view of this student. I have a different experience, so I have a positive view. I'm able to challenge that in a different way, obviously as a professional, but in a way that I'm counteracting what you're saying because you haven't done X, Y, and Z. Parents know their children better than anyone else. And I say this all the time, children will present themselves maybe differently in a school setting than they do at home. I'm not going to be naive to that either. However, we just need to make sure that when you are challenging the biases, you are doing it in a way that you are advocating for the child. And because I have seen it, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, but there have been times where parents, rightly so, would get very irate, and you can see that the mood is changing or the attitude is changing. And then they're now perceived another way as well. Then they'll be like, oh, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It's important that we try to stay calm in those situations because we don't want to feed into their stereotypes. And if you can get your child assessed and you can get an educational psychologist report, you can get a speech and language therapist report, you can actually go back and say, have you done everything here to show that you have supported my child? Because you're saying that this is the end. You're saying this is why they're going to be excluded, but these things haven't been done. And that's if the child has a special educational need. If it's just behavior, a way to challenge those biases is when it comes to, you can ask for freedom of information request. And that is, you want to know what the exclusion rates are like in that school. What is the ethnicity of the exclusion rates? Is it mainly Black boys? Why is that the case? Why are we not doing enough? I think there are things we can do around that as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Kemi. I really appreciate that. And again, you've just sewed into an area that we need to explore further through the Black boys community. So in summation, one line, one sentence, what is one thing that you want to say to the Black boys community?
That was not easy to summarize in one line, but one thing I would say is be your biggest advocate. Be your biggest advocate and don't back down just because somebody knows how to articulate themselves very well. I've been in places where I feel people can speak better than me, so I kind of quite become a recluse. Speak up, don't back down, and when it comes to getting support, reach out. What is your local offer? What does your local authority offer? What is it that you can get from the school? What does the school offer? Make sure you explore every avenue before they try to take it to that point of exclusion.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much, Kemi. Really, really appreciate that. And that's actually now a perfect segue as we look into primary and secondary. So I think, yeah, enough talking for myself. I'm just going to head straight over to Omar. So Omar is currently a director of sports at a London prep school. Previously, he has taught at a state school in England and worked in the UAE. Alongside his teaching, he's also a professional sports coach, co-director of Serene Kids, and a PhD researcher, and lastly, a member of the Black Men Teach core team as well. So we definitely have to put that one in there. But Omar, share what's your experience of Black Boys within your remit, and then I'll bring us back into summation in terms of what is one thing that you want to charge the Black Boys community.
Hi, yeah, good evening, everyone. Yeah, good being here. Yeah, as Johnoi just said, yeah, I'm part of the Black Men Teach team. Also, a primary school teacher. One probably few and far between Black males within primary, which touched on a bit more. Also work with ACE, Afro-Caribbean Engagement, sort of cricket charity, which looks at getting Black boys and girls into cricket. And yeah, currently doing a PhD research, looking at sort of creating more cultural awareness within the talent pathway in sport. And then lastly with Sarin Kids, where looking at promoting computing and digital media within schools and getting that into diverse areas as well. So looking at sort of primary education, I think the journey initially, obviously being a Black person going through school, but then particularly when I started my teacher training, I think that was an eye-opener in terms of what particularly Black boys are getting. And it was on my first placement when I was in a school, I was sitting in the staff room and this experienced teacher was sort of creating a label about pupils and her last school that she was at, which happened to be ironically the school at the end of my road where I grew up. And he created a real negative picture about them. And at the time I was thinking, why is she saying this sort of stuff? She didn't really know the kids or the area. She just worked there, she said, for like a year. And I was like, I must have said to her then, oh, I know that school, that's school at the end of my road. And she was a bit sheepish by it. But it was kind of like, if she's taken that attitude into every classroom, or she was a teacher for many years, what other teachers or children has she impacted? The children at the end of my road, are they then having these opinions when they go out on forward and beyond? So my initial thing to think about is that are Black boys, are they motivated in primary school? Are they motivated to achieve? And if you look at sort of the self-determination theory from DC and Ryan, if you look at the autonomy, the competence, and the relatedness, it's, are the Black boys, do they feel in control of their behaviour and their goals throughout the primary area of schooling? And then the competence, believing that their actions will have impactful in shaping their academic success. And then the last one is relatedness. Do they feel in a sense of belonging in the school, in the classroom, within the school system? So if we go into more detail with that and how we can sort of help those three areas, when we look at sort of the notion of we want to prevent the pipeline from opening. We don't want it to wait till they get to secondary school or beyond. We want to early intervention, early help, so that they enjoy school before it gets too late. Why are we sort of focusing on, say, reforming them when we can shape them and shape their minds earlier on to have success? So when they get to secondary school, they come with less baggage potentially, and secondary school teachers are not trying to catch up, basically. So we're trying to earlier prevention with that. And with that, I think schools, teachers, training for biases, cultural awareness. Within the primary sector, there are more white teachers, so we have to educate them and educate them on their biases and how can we help them? How can we help them to teach them about these labels that might be putting on the children? Are they competent in terms of how they're going to speak to the parents, the language they use, the tone, the words they say, things that might come across, but also then the curriculum. Even in my current setting, looking at, say, Remembrance Day and the World War, I put on a video during my film lesson. We spoke about, say, Chinese, Blacks, Asian peoples within the war, and they hadn't covered that in their history lesson with the other teacher, and the children were like, oh wow, we didn't even know this, sort of thing. So that allowed them to maybe see me and think, oh, actually, he's a teacher who potentially he cares for everyone and not just the white sort of people who was in the war. So within the primary curriculum, it is fairly open, so you can sort of differentiate, change it the way to match your community within your school environment. And obviously, Black boys, if for instance you're learning about World War and it's the same thing, Winston Churchill or this, well, you can talk about some of the Black heroes, so you can show that their history was a part of a major global success, and that can inspire them to go beyond. And that kind of links into role models and what role models are they getting within the primary school sector. What role models are we showing them? Are we showing them a diverse range of role models, not just say a footballer, or okay, yeah, you want to go into football, but potentially it could be a sports scientist within football, or other avenues of say lawyers, or could be a top salesperson, or whatever it is. There's lots of different role models out there for them to be successful in what they need to do. And then that links into sort of mental health, neurodiversity. Are we helping the children who get an early diagnosis, what we sort of spoke about briefly before, but if they get the help from earlier, then when they get to secondary school, the help will be in place. The EHCPs will follow on from the primary school into the secondary school, rather than it being, okay, year 7, something's been mentioned, and year 8, it could be by year 10 they finally get the help. But if they had that earlier in the primary school sector, in year 2, year 1, then that will follow through for the rest of their schooling. And then looking at sort of restorative, if there are issues or things that might happen in schools, looking at it in terms of the support are we giving them? Are we coming from a holistic understanding purposes, understanding the whole person? And then also the praise and positivity. Are you creating opportunity for them to have success? Are you positively reinforcing them? When you're calling home, is it just bad stuff? Or are you actually calling the parent to pick up the phone and say, your kid did X, Y, and Z well today? A lot of the parents who I spoke from my experience, and as a parent as well, a lot of the time, your time you pick up your phone, you're thinking from the school, it's something bad. What has my son done today? And it's like, actually, if you get something about praising, you're thinking, wow, this is better. You're going to then go home, praise your kid for doing well in school, and it's reinforcing it again from home, not just reinforcement from a negative, but reinforcing the positive. So that could then lead on the next day forward. And then leading next thing, sort of working around sort of parents and working with them. Could have parental teacher workshops where the teachers and parents are involved in these workshops, from external staff coming in delivering it, or maybe it's a teacher delivering it, but teachers and parents are working together to improve it. Also, it could be even a teacher, a parent, sorry, within your community, a parent coming in, working with the teachers. It could be about languages or their cultures, just helping the teachers understand them. And it can be more powerful, even if it's parents involved in this. They're going to feel they're part of the school, and if they feel they're part of the school, they feel they're related, their kid will more likely have a sense of greater belonging to your class. And then looking at as well with parents, parent associations, do they really have a voice in your school? A lot of them, we have PTAs, but what impact do they really see? Maybe what they speak to the senior staff, that trickle down into the normal teacher, and is that getting truly visualized from their point of view? I think if the parents are having a negative impact of the school, that then can flow into the children, and that child will come into school, and then they will perceive you in a negative way as well as a teacher, and then it's a battling thing. So if you and the parent have a good relationship, then that can help with improving children and developing them to the best way possible. And then just in general, I think with being a black male, a lot of parents in primary school, they're potentially surprised when I say, particularly when I was working in the data sector, I'm the teacher, I'm not the TA, or just a helper around the school. I think so. If there are potentially more black males working with the black boys, whatever capacity it is, they will see and be inspired to be better than what they potentially first envisaged what they could be. So yeah, I think the future going forward is just to keep ensuring that every black child, they have a sense of autonomy. They feel that they're in control of their behavior and their goals. For whatever guidance you do with them, they have a sense of autonomy about it. They feel that they're involved in that process. So it's not just the teacher saying it. Competency, do they feel competent in shaping their own future? A lot of children feel that, well, we've got no hope, or they're not going to achieve at secondary school. But actually, you can have that sense of success for them. And then relatedness, that sense of belonging within school. Does school actually mean meaningful for them? How can you create opportunities for that? So yeah, hopefully I haven't gone over time. Whirlwind tour of primary. Yeah, thank you for listening.
No, thank you so much, Omar. Literally, there's so much that you said, and we actually need we can actually have a whole event alone talking about primary school. But just before we kind of segue into secondary, and just this question, just briefly, how can primary schools support the transition of black boys into secondary, especially when we're talking about behavior? Just briefly on that one.
Yeah, I think, for instance, if you've got a mentoring scheme set up, say in say year 6, you've got the children set up mentoring scheme, having that conversation with the second school that go into, but then also, can you have that conversation with that child maybe going forward into year 7? What are they tracking? Are you tracking their future? So a lot of the times, I think, as a primary teacher, you send them in secondary school, and that's it. You don't really see or hear from them again, sort of thing. So it's maybe having that conversation, or being open to year 7 head of year, or that transition teacher, maybe going back to you in year 7. Oh, so and so is in our school. Maybe the first day they've had a bit of difficulty. How did they manage it in primary school? What did you do, or what have you? So having that conversation where it's not just a more linear, longitudinal help, rather than just a short burst.
No, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I know some of you guys will have some questions. Sorry, I need to change the social media, but you can reach out to the Black Men Teach on email, and we can forward any questions you may have on to Omar. So we're gonna go just swiftly into secondary school. So I don't need to introduce the man himself, but Albert, secondary. Talk to us.
I'm gonna make you out, Johnoi. Johnoi just messaged me, said, "Can we be quick?" So, I'm not gonna talk for too long. Sometime secondary, we could go and speak about quite a lot of aspects. Omar done quite well to cover various aspects of the primary school. I think there's a lot that links with the primary school stuff that Omar discussed, and some of the stuff that was discussed by Kemi in terms of proofs, and also the send stuff by Mellow. I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, I think it's important to remember that our black boys are all different. Right, so our black boys are all different. Their experiences are not monolithic. Right, so a lot of what we've discussed is around a particular narrative, a particular theme. Right, but I think especially in secondary school, it's important to consider and remember that just because we have this maybe stereotype, this narrative of black boys, that's not the story of all of our black boys. Right, so it's important to engage and get to know our students and our children as parents, and just have a better understanding of the child. Right, how we interact with Femi is not going to be how we interact with John or whoever, right? So it's understanding the needs of our children, and how we can best support them through education. I think that's one thing that's important to me. In the students that I have the best relationships, and I'm thinking solely sort of my students from Black or African Caribbean heritage, right? They're all various different conversations. You know, some students, they're doing well behaviorally, but it's academic support they require. Some students, they have it's the home life. Some students, it's depending on where you are in the UK, it's understanding the potential trauma that our Black boys are facing in current times, right? And the potential that our Black boys, I'm aware of it, that, you know, that a friend could have passed away, a family member, a cousin, right? So it's understanding the trauma and emotions that our Black boys aren't always afforded the time, the space to actually express. I think that's one thing that in my practice and my work with Black boys, it's all great having the knowing them, but it's also for me affording them that time where it's one-to-one and they're able to actually be themselves, drop that barrier, drop their guard, and be emotional. Right, over the past 2 weeks, I've been in a situation with 3 different Black boys where they've just needed to cry, and they can't do that elsewhere because of whatever reasons, but they've just needed to get it out. And it's I think a lot of it is about creating those safe spaces for our Black boys, whether that's through mentorship. I think what part of my sort of area was speaking about what initiatives can schools use to further support our Black students, whether that's mentorship, whether that's academic or pastoral, and that I think the power of mentor. I'm a mentor. I've been mentoring before I began teaching. I still do bits of mentoring, so I will always believe in the power of mentorship, in the ability to transform the lives of our young people. But that mentorship just affords time for that young person to actually connect, to actually be heard, to be actually listened to, and then for that mentor to go away and put things in place, whether that's rebuilding relationships with staff, whether that's having conversations with parents, just so that holistic development of that child is being considered. So it's great to have Jermaine, Jordan, and Cameron in the call from Directional, because they work at my school currently, and they do great work in terms of group work, one-to-one work with some of our students who need it most, and it's investing in that. So, for example, there was a period where I wasn't able to physically do mentoring myself, and Jermaine and his team do fantastic work in terms of that transition from year 6 to year 7. They do fantastic work in terms of keeping students in schools. They do fantastic work in terms of going to various different schools and working, but then they also have their own provisions to support young people outside of the mainstream school system. So they are really hitting the nail on the head in terms of getting young people the support that they require in the various spaces. Last thing I want to mention, that you know, I could talk about quite a lot of things, but last thing I want to mention is academic achievement. Right, it's possible, and it happens. Our Black boys can be academic, right? So where is this narrative that they can't be successful in education? You know, we've spoken about some labels that can get placed on them, but they can be academic. Sometimes they don't see that enough. Sometimes they don't see the positive things that they can do. And I think that's a lot of what we do, what we want to do, and we are currently doing for our mentorship program, is showing Black boys that academic excellence is achievable for them. All right. So it's having that belief in them and showing them what they can do. You know, tuition, sometimes because of their backgrounds and their family circumstances, they can't necessarily afford tuition, but it's how can we get them access to tuition so that they value education beyond the school system. At the beginning, Johnoi said we don't want to berate the education system. It's not you know, talk about all the flaws, but there are some flaws. We're aware of it, right? So how can we do our part outside of the school system to show our Black boys that they have a community, that they can be academic, and we're not just relying on what the school has to offer. What can we do as this village, as this community for our Black boys? So yeah, so that's, I mean, I could go on. This is, hopefully we have a follow-on from this where we can look at maybe the different the different stages or the different aspects in a little bit more depth. But I think it's understanding that our Black boys are each different. They're different, right? They have different experience. They have different needs, right? And affording them that space and that environment to really unlock their potential, but be themselves, right? Sometimes our young people are just carrying this guard to their emotions, to who they really are because of what the world requires from them, when really and truly it's damaging, right? Some of the trauma, some of the emotions that our young people have locked in, we need to be able to give them space to resolve that, and support them through that. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, but then there's great people out there, like some of the people I've mentioned, some of the people in the chat that are doing great work to support young people through that.
Yeah, thank you, Alps. Thank you for sharing that. I know. So Isaac, who's in there, and he's generally someone that's definitely support the BMT mission. Got 5 sons, and he talks about the fact that they're all different. So I really like the fact that you experience or explain that these Black boys are not a monolith. They're all different, and we need to actually see them as that. I know. So David asked the following question, and just briefly, how can teachers or school staff support? How can teachers and Sorry, that was the caretaker. How can teachers and school staff support and encourage our Black boys to access emotional, mental health support they may need? Maybe within your HOI role, if you can shed light on that just briefly.
So we speak about, modeling things. It's modeling that vulnerability for me. So modeling that, we have emotions, we have things that, maybe we're scared of, we have things that have impact us, we have things that make us want to cry, because we have this. I think the first step is modeling it, creating space to actually begin to discuss it and unpick it. All of this comes with time. So there's students that when you first meet to them, they're not going to want to open up. The second, they not want to, it's the 10th or the 15th conversation that they might open up. So with mentoring, we speak about it being long-term. We speak about a lot of it just happening over a long period of time. It's giving them that time. And so I have 2 students in particular, they really did need counseling. And I'm, as much as I'm a mentor and I'm that voice for them, I said, look, I'm always going to be here for you, but I really want you to take that step and go into counseling. They'd refused for at least 2 years. But with time, it's getting them to understand that, look, just take that step, and the worst that can happen is that you decide, okay, this isn't for me, and they both took that step unless they went through the whole process of counseling. So I think for me, modeling, affording time and space to discuss things, and then being an advocate for the type of services that can take that support that little bit further.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate that. So we're going to go next on to the item number 5 on the agenda. And we're going to be hearing from Ziggy Moore. So More Education was established 8 years ago to support children that needed extra help with their GCSEs. We have now flourished into supporting secondary students from age 11 to 16. They are the UK's leading Black-owned online tuition service. They have consistently achieved above 90% GCSE passes for both maths and English. Their focus is to provide quality and affordable supplementary education for the students in their community. Mr. Moore has been an English teacher for nearly 2 decades, having worked with the most challenging students and consistently delivering positive outcomes. When we're talking about village, this section right here is all about it. So over to you, Mr. Moore.
Yes, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who's presented. I've heard some brilliant points. Right, so there's a historical context to supplementary schools, specifically around Black boys. I think it was mentioned earlier that the systemic kind of impact of the school system has been happening since the 60s. So my father would have come here in 63, my uncle came here in 62, and my dad didn't finish secondary school. My uncle was, although he passed his 11 plus, was able to go on to grammar school. The racism was so kind of endemic, not only of the children, but of the staff, that he also dropped out of secondary school for a number of different reasons. The culture of the quote unquote Windrush generation didn't believe when students were coming home, when children were coming home, speaking about the stuff that they encountered, the racism that they and abuse that they encountered. Their parents, that would have been my grandparents, did not believe them. Yeah, because teachers don't lie, authority figures don't lie. And that's the kind of generation which we come to. And I think it's really important that in the day and age that we live in, the information age, that we inform ourselves firstly of the historical context of where we're coming from. So I've kind of got a few books, and the first book that I would recommend that one starts off with, and I always recommend this book, is here, How the West Indian Child Was Made to Be Educationally Subnormal. This was published over 50 years ago in 1972 by educator Bernard Cord, an educator from Grenada. And this started off as a pamphlet, in essence, because children were facing so much discrimination, specifically where children from the African Caribbean community who would have come over in the 60s were deemed to be educationally subnormal and sent to special schools. My dad wasn't sent to one of those special schools. However, he was sent to, and he was kicked out of school and sent to what's known as an approved school. That disconnect specifically with the African Caribbean community is what eventually went on to form the supplementary school movement. It was understood and recognized by leaders in the community that the education system cannot support and facilitate the needs of our children. And although that was over 50 years ago, from the statistics and data that's been quoted by previous speakers, that rings true now. Hence why Black boys, specifically Black Caribbean boys, have some of the lowest attainment rates at GCSE passes, A to C, including English and maths. To dig down a little bit more on that data, what we're finding is Black boys of mixed heritage, that's mixed race boys, tend to, within that group, fall even further below in regards to attainment. And another book that I would recommend to truly understand that would be Natives by Akala, Race, Class, and Ruins of an Empire. So this kind of gives you a holistic understanding of how the impact of his supplementary school that he went to was one of the first opportunities for him to not only realize that he was academically bright, but to also shine. And a lot of our boys within the education system do not get the opportunity to shine, specifically in secondary school. And that's one of the reasons why I set up More Education. I also realized, and I do every day, I realize how privileged I was to have attended a supplementary school and for this to almost be my norm. My expectation is that it's standard to send your child to a supplementary school, and this is something that we all know. But I come to realize I grew up in quite a maybe a revolutionary home. So I'll give you another book that was a standard staple within my home. This is The Opinions and Philosophies of Marcus Garvey. This is almost like the Bible of my home, second to. And with that understanding of a kind of Pan-Africanist mindset, once we establish ourselves within that mindset, we understand it's about doing for self. So once I started teaching, it was always very clear to me that this was going to be the ultimate goal, to set something up for ourselves, because we're the only ones who can actually do for self. And that's become very evident in the work that we do in speaking to parents, speaking to Black parents, and seeing the impact that it has, more education has, where children who weren't engaged in education are now engaged. One of the key things that we do is we ensure that all of our staff are Black. And when I say staff, I don't necessarily mean teachers. I mean from our teaching staff to our admin staff to the people who may call you, because that cultural connection, that first point of contact, as we know, 90% of communication is non-verbal. Yeah. So there are certain things that don't need to be said and are instantly communicated. For example, my name. People will often see my name, Ziggy Moore. And if I said to you, the first thing they say is, oh, Ziggy is in Bob Marley's son. Yes, brilliant. If I said to you that my father was a Rasta, that would probably be of no surprise to you whatsoever, because culturally you can usually make the steps and make those connections. And that's often what our children need, is that non-verbal cultural link and understanding that is often missing. And without the supplementary school movement, and I hope not to be the only person to continue to do this, because let's say I only have the facility for 500 children. We know there are way more than 500 children in the UK who are going to need the type of support that the children at More Education are also receiving. The final book in my collection that I also always recommend to young Black boys, specifically teenagers, is the autobiography of Malcolm X. The reason why I love this book and I cherish this book, because what it shows is oftentimes we've spoken about the stigma attached to a lot of our boys. But the transformative power that we have within to be great isn't exemplified, or I think it's best exemplified in that story. And ensuring that we are informed, ensuring that we've read, and we're very clear on the system we're in. We're very clear on what it is going to take in order to fight that, is a necessity. And doing what we do here with these type of discussions are really, really important. And again, I say I'm privileged because I grew up around a lot of these books, and I realized not everybody did. Hence why I felt to build my discussion around that. The final book that I'm going to recommend that will give you a great understanding, I'm kind of halfway through, is another book called The Frontline by Ishmael Blagrove. A story of struggle, resistance, and the Black identity, specifically in Notting Hill, one of the first Black communities to kind of be formed in the late 50s, early 60s. The supplementary school movement is more than just additional tuition. The supplementary school movement is about empowerment for our community and creating future leaders. So hopefully I've been on time. I'm happy to answer any questions. My name is Ziggy Moore. You can catch me at More Education 01 on Instagram. That's where we're at.
Awesome. Ziggy, thank you. And I love the last thing that you actually said, because many people think that Saturday schools, extra tuition, the fact that you mentioned that is more than that. It's about empowerment for our next generation of leaders. I guess one thing I would say is, or ask, sorry, what is one charge that you will say to the Black boys community? What's one thing that, from leaving this call, what is one thing that they have to do?
I'd reiterate, are you saying specifically to parents or to our boys?
It could be to both.
I would say, please inform yourselves. Say forearmed is forewarned. I've just recommended 5 books out there. Yeah. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is, again, I continue to say I speak from a place of privilege. Sometimes it can be quite upsetting when parents come to kind of us or come to me as a last port of call, if that makes sense. I tend to find we can often be quite naive about what's happening out there. It's almost this idea of not my child, yeah, or that's kind of them. out there, as opposed to fully understanding that there's a historical, social and political context of us being in this country within the sphere of education. And if we're going to put our children into the education system, it's incumbent upon us to understand what that is, so we can begin to protect our children, as all other cultures do. I grew up in North London. Most of my Greek friends went to Greek school and speak fluent Greek because they understand their culture and the importance of maintaining one's culture and an understanding of that and what that means, having that as almost a shield as you go into the general world. It's important that we do that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. We will be showing all the details, but do connect with Ziggy Moorhead and just what he's doing. We really appreciate the support for Black Men Teach and the fact that you've added to this conversation. So yes, let's move on to item number 6. So we have Tracy Campbell, who is the CEO and the founder of Together Transforming Behaviour, which is a company providing consultancy, training and coaching to teachers and parents, helping them to manage children's behaviour. Now, Tracy has recently founded the Academy for Behaviour Leadership, a one-year program for primary and secondary practitioners leading on behaviour in schools. This program is designed to move behaviour leads from simply being delegated to the role to being developed in the role as they coach colleagues towards competent classroom management. Tracy is also an inspirational keynote speaker, author, and trainer renowned for motivating teachers to move ideas about positive behavior management from common knowledge to common practice. Tracy speaks candidly about her own multiple exclusions from school and how the caring presence of only one teacher helped her to push beyond her perceived boundaries. Now, Tracy's first book, Will You Be the One, is the accompaniment to her series of behavior training workshops for school staff that get to the heart of the issues that lie behind challenging behavior. So something very much linked into what we've been discussing. Now, this training course featured on the Investing in Diversity course at the Institute of Education. Her second book, Behavior Basics for Parents, is the accompaniment to a series of behavior workshops for parents that was featured on the Channel 4 documentary, Mr. Drew's School for Boys. Tracy, be unfiltered. Just do you, like hit the community hard.
Thank you so much. Rest assured, everybody, first of all, good evening, and thank you so much for this opportunity. It's a big deal for us to be obviously carving out time in our busy evening to be online. So rest assured, I've just started a 10-minute timer, and as soon as it beeps, I will stop. If I'm in mid-flow, I will stop. So there we go. The timer has begun. So I'm going to share screen because I just find it helpful for me to kind of stay focused on the specific brief for me tonight. Good to see you again, Albert, 2 nights in a row. Wow, Albert jumped on my taster webinar for the Academy last night. So really good to see you online again. Okay, so I mean, Jonoi's introduction has done a phenomenal job in terms of giving you a sense as to who I am. I just think it's going to be helpful tonight for you to kind of understand my educational experience in terms of the amount of contacts that I've had with Black boys over the last 3 decades. And then I'm going to bring it right up to speed as to what that looks like now in the context of my role as a behavior consultant. So I've been a primary school teacher. I became an advanced skills teacher in behavior management. And so the kind of specialism in behavior management began when I was still teaching. So I've been a primary school teacher in 2 Islington schools. So as it stands right here, right now, I train and coach teachers and parents, helping them to understand and manage children's behavior. Yeah. So just in terms of contextually, so as a company, we're offering training, we're offering coaching and consultancy to schools. We do some work with parents around helping them to understand and respond to their children's behavior. And we also do some work with students themselves around transition from year 6 to year 7. Okay. So the question was asked, you know, where do you encounter Black boys? And I'm sure, you know, you've already kind of ascertained the minute I say that my role is specifically in behavior, you can imagine how often Black boys are coming across my pathway. But I want to talk specifically about these two pieces of my work, if I can. So the first one is in my role as a behavior management consultant. So just to kind of paint a picture. So when I am supporting teachers with behavior management, I'm sitting in their lesson and I'm watching, I'm doing a series of coaching sessions with them, but a lot of it involves observing. And in that role of observer in a classroom, I see a lot of hypervigilance around Black boys. I see Black boys being, and I'm going to use quite a strong term here, crushed. It's as if their exuberance and their charisma and their energy and their vibrancy is just not welcomed in a lot of the classrooms that I have sometimes the misfortune of having to sit in and observe. And I just want to share one story, and I've put a little picture prompt on the screen there to remind myself. One particular year 4 class, I was sitting in and I was observing, and I understand that the position of an observer is quite a privileged one. I'm not managing the dynamics that the teacher is having to worry about. I'm just sitting there taking everything in under that behavior banner. So I was sitting in that seat in one particular classroom, and within 5 minutes, you know, there was a particular Black boy who came to my attention. And he came to my attention because he was very energetic, he was very vibrant, the class had just been on a trip, and he had a lot to say about, you know, what he remembered from the trip. And he was very clever at making a link between what they had done on the trip and what they were doing in class that day. But what the teacher kept doing, she kept shutting him down. And it became so apparent because she was endorsing behaviors on the part of, you know, white girls particularly, that she was, you know, kind of correcting on the part of this Black boy. So I'm observing in this lesson. And then it came to a point where I needed to share my feedback with her and her senior management. And the beautiful thing about the way that I coach is I'm very much about facts over feelings. So I'm not giving you my feedback and telling you how I felt about what you did. I'm telling you what you did. I actually call it playback rather than feedback. I literally just play back. When they came in, you did X, then you said Y. And when I relayed to her, like factually, word for word, you said this to child X, but yet you said this to child Y, the teacher started to cry. Because I think there's something about being confronted with what for me was a very apparent unfair situation that was happening in her class. And what she said was, she acknowledged that there had been some kind of a disagreement with that particular boy earlier on in the day, and that she hadn't let it go, that she felt a way about what that boy had done earlier on, and she was harboring it. And I would love to say that I'm able to kind of get down to the nitty-gritty with other teachers in the way that I was with that teacher. But that is just one of numerous examples that I could share of situations that I'm in where I just see all of these things that I've got on the board here, little grace. So the Live Your Dreams workshops that I'm delivering are specifically not just for Black boys, these are for all year 6s who are transitioning from year 6 into year 7. And there is just a vibrancy and an excitement that is often not welcomed. And I put boundary testing there, and it's really interesting sometimes when I step into that space as a Black professional, that sometimes the boys are so wowed by the fact that there is a Black professional in a room, you know, that they get a little bit overexcited and they test the boundaries. But I think there's something about, and a number of people have mentioned this tonight, modeling, that sometimes I'm very deliberate when I am working with groups of children, particularly Black boys, to show you don't need to be afraid of their vibrancy. You don't need to be afraid of their energy and their excitement. Put a perimeter fence around it, put some boundaries around it, make the expectations clear, but we don't need to be fearful. So those are the kind of two primary areas where I am kind of crossing paths, as it were, with Black boys in my work as a consultant. So there were a few questions, Johnoi and Albert, that you kind of sent through that people had asked, and I really wanted to make sure that I'm at least giving you some pointers as to things that you can begin to chew on and think about. So one of the questions was, how can schools and parents establish open and effective lines of communication to collaborate when it comes to managing behavior of Black boys in a constructive and a supportive manner? And some of these things have already been said, but I think they're worthy of repetition. There's something about great day and grey day communication. Somebody's already said that. I think it may have been Omar, but just something about just be, and I think with particular groups, this is even more important. This is good practice across our teaching, but with particular families, be intentional about having great day and grade day conversations. Let them know when their child has met an expectation. Let them know when their child has had a good day in school. I think that's of great importance. The other thing is about managing the expectations. So there are going to be times when there has to be some level of negative reporting. Manage the expectations. And these are the things that I'm saying to colleagues in my training and coaching. If you are coming up to me on the playground and you're telling me about my son again, there's a countenance that I'm going to assume that I need to be allowed to assume. I'm not suggesting I'm going to be sharing and cussing and carrying on, but I'm going to be upset. I might have a frown on my face. And I just find that Black Caribbean and Black African families are not afforded the liberty to have a countenance that is consistent with the conversation that we're having. So I think we need to manage the expectations. You know, context is key. Where are you having this conversation with me? Are you preserving my dignity? Are you protecting my sense of privacy? I think those things are really important. One of the things that parents often say is, what is the support beyond sanctions? I've heard you say what my son's going to get in terms of a punishment and a sanction, but what other support package is available? It often feels like it's heavily punitive, but there's no other support beyond the sanctions. So these are the things that I'm prompting parents to ask these questions. What else are you putting in place? And emphasize that sense of partnership. You know, what are you doing? This is what I'm doing at home. What can you be doing? So the other question was about initiatives around programs that parents can engage in about leading to positive outcomes for Black boys. And I think it would be a travesty if I can't recommend my own course. So we run a course for parents, Behaviour Basics for Parents. And in fact, there's a course starting on the 26th of February. It runs for 5 weeks. And, you know, I was really struck by what, I think her name was Mrs. Mellow, talked about this idea of indiscipline. And I firmly believe that what you permit indoors, by default, you permit outdoors. So sometimes, if I'm honest, and this is not always the case, but sometimes the case is such that the boundaries are not even very tight at home, that children are allowed to, you know, speak with a particular tone, not follow instructions. And it is a given that when they step into spaces external to the home, often in the context of school where there's low expectations, that you're going to see a mimicking of those kind of behaviors that are sometimes, not all the time, not checked at home. So Behaviour Basics is really a place for parents to examine their behavior expectations at home and ensure that they are consistent and they are conducive with the expectations that children are going to meet in school. And lastly, what role can parent-teacher partnerships play in creating a consistent and cohesive approach to managing behavior? I have got 30 seconds. Here we go. I think there's something about being committed to building and sustaining relationships. I don't think the Black community can afford to allow a relationship to break down. Sometimes we hear colleagues saying, my relationship with that family has broken down. Black families can't afford that. Black families cannot afford to allow a relationship to break down. So we have to be the people who are committed to sustaining that, challenge schools about tracking behavior data, make sure the policy is clear and fair. If you don't understand the policy, ask questions, because that's the thing that you can bring schools back to when things have fallen down. And I think the way forward for schools is very much that comprehensive and consistent engagement in anti-racist practice. I can't, for me, see a way forward systemically where schools are not actively involved in that process. That is my 10 minutes.
Man.
Not often Johnoi is left speechless. I'd say very powerful, very, very, very powerful, and definitely things to take from that, from all sides, as parents, as teachers. It's just people connected with young people, with our Black boys, and at all levels, from primary school. I think a lot of the stuff you mentioned with parenting is quite key. That a lot of it is what's the word, done in early stage, right? So early years, primary school, because sometimes when you lose that parent, when they don't have that discipline, when they don't have those expectations of high standards from an early age, it's hard to bring it back in the later years in secondary school. some really good stuff. Do check out Tracy on social media. Was mentioned, there was an Academy for Behaviour Leadership course that she works through with teachers, educators, anyone involved with working with young people or managing behaviour. I jumped in that yesterday, and it was powerful, just as powerful as her talk today. Is there any questions? I know we're 6 minutes over. Johnoi didn't quite keep it as tight as he would have liked. But some powerful things. I hope you guys have felt the value in I know it's been short, sharp, brief, but that's the idea is to begin the conversation. I know Johnoi and myself and the BMT team will be planning a lot more to this in terms of a series, focusing on the community, equipping us in our different roles and enabling us to work together to support our Black boys. There's another speaker.
Yeah, so I think now that we've spoken about education, it was really good for us to kind of just finish off looking and just briefly, Kimo can actually just finish this off in terms of what work can be done outside to make sure that the boys are being entertained and are kept invested from a holistic approach. So Kimo, over to you to just close this off.
It's so hard to kind of follow some of these powerful speakers. And I mean, looking at myself, for example, I'm coming from so many different kind of roles as well. So daytime, I'm an assistant head teacher. Then in the evening, I am a youth worker working in the community of the fantastic Moss Side community. I'm sure many of us have heard of Moss Side, and obviously over time, some of the good and the bad. But I love working there, and because of working there, from a young age, it's made me who I am today, to want it to go and work in education as well as work with our young people. I'm really, really passionate about community work. I'm really, really passionate about youth empowerment. And I just thought to start off, I just kind of wanted to share kind of how I got into it a little bit quickly, and also how people or young people can kind of get into youth work as well, or that kind of youth engagement within their local community as well. So I always kind of said, like, obviously coming here from Jamaica, I didn't know what it was I wanted to do. I fell in love with community work. The minute I came into this community in Moss Side, there was just so much going on at the time around youth violence, around gang culture, and loads of different things that were happening at the time. I lost my friend at the age of 15. He was in the park next to where I lived. And it made me realize that there was a problem. There was a problem in the community. There was a problem with young people, and just kind of lack of resources, lack of things that were happening. And it happened at a most crucial point as well, where the government cut youth clubs funding. And it was around that 2012, 2011 window where at that time I was going youth club myself. And then it was around 2012, 2011 that the youth workers said one day, right, we've all been made redundant. And this was like youth clubs where loads of young people go into. I was going to it and I loved it. They empowered me. I had such great youth workers at the time, and they were so inspiring. And there always is that phrase of you can't be what you don't see. And growing up, I seen a lot of youth workers that looked like me, hence why I decided I wanted to work in youth work. So for me, growing up and having that youth engagement, that community work really inspired me to want to make a difference. So off little Kimo B went when I was 16. I thought, right, you know what, I'm going to take on this work as a community youth work leader, and started doing youth work from a young age. And because of that, now till this day, I run my own youth club on a Friday night, 6 till 9. It's tomorrow. I'm excited. I'm always excited. I love youth work. And 100 up to 120 young people attend our youth club night. So even though the council youth clubs back then that were funded and all the rest of it, even though they've disappeared, I created my own youth work organizations called KAISO. And KAISO is all about empowering young people, giving them a voice. It's youth led. It's giving young people that chance to lead. Because what you have sometimes is those youth provisions where the staff are saying, right, you need to do this, or you need to get involved in that, or come and do that, you know, and we want young people to have that voice where they can kind of make some decisions. So our youth night is youth-led, where young people come, they engage in dance, they engage in music. We have a music studio. We have a lot of mentoring that goes on. We have a lot of debate club. We have a lot of podcasting, getting the young people to talk and share obviously how they're feeling. So it's really, really important. I think personally that we need youth clubs to come back. We need youth workers. I think schools do a lot in the daytime in trying to unpick a lot of issues, but we can't do it all in school. So in the evening time, the young people need that space where they can come and youth worker can talk to them about obviously what's going on, what's on their mind, because young people need to talk. We've seen over time that there's a lot of young people kind of not opening up, especially lately. And they're missing that kind of key element of mentorship, of youth work. I heard Albs talk about it before in regards to mentoring and the powerfulness of that. It's the same that happens within youth work, and young people need youth workers to help, guide, support, nurture, inspire, and develop them. So for me, it's really important that youth engagement, especially around Black boys. And I've realized that within our youth club, we have, I would say 98% of our young people that attend the youth club is Black Caribbean, Black Afro-Caribbean. And that's a fact. In Moss Side, the young people that come, 98% of them are Black Afro-Caribbean, and they come and a huge majority of them are involved. They get involved, they come and they do great things. They get involved in the performing arts, get involved in the rapping, they do all that sort of things. But what we also notice is a small percentage of those young people that are hard to engage. And we're looking at different techniques and different things to try and engage those young people. And we're seeing it working. We are trying different things and we are seeing it working. So that youth engagement is really, really strong in trying to connect with our young Black boys as well. And kind of getting them to understand that, look, this is their space to do stuff. So we have got a lot of things planned. I know tomorrow the male youth workers are going to get the boys together and we're going to have a chat. What we've noticed is, especially lately, is kind of obviously a lot of young people smoking, etc. So we are going to have some conversations with them tomorrow. So we've prepared some things that we're going to do tomorrow with the boys group, and we've got a girls group that the female youth workers are going to take into a space and do some youth engagement. But we've done some brilliant work over the years, and I'm so proud. And I think youth work, we need it. We need to lobby the government. We need money. We need funding to make these things happen, because having those youth engagement is such a key element to our young people's life, especially our young Black boys, which a lot of them we've seen have been a bit lost, especially with that exploitation and loads of things that are going on in the background. So it's important to see people that look like them doing positive things in the community, such as youth work, to be able to guide and support them. So I think for me, when I look at some of the great achievements from young people, I remember when Black Lives Matter happened and there was huge protests and all the things of it. We got young people to come and talk about their experiences on the BBC Northwest Tonight, which is Greater Manchester news, and they were able to share and contribute. And that's what I like to do. I like to get our young people involved in so many things that can better their life chances, but also getting them to talk about what matters to them and getting them to be really, really passionate about some of the things that really matter to them. So I just kind of wanted to add that. I know I'm cautious of time at the same time, but I just thought I really just wanted to add that element in terms of it's important to get our Black boys engaged. It's important to get our Black boys involved in some of the great work that's happening, because they have a voice like every other person, and it's important to include that element. The community element is an important part. School and education is amazing, and I love that aspect of things. But after, when they leave school, that community element is also important. And if we can start to train our young Black boys in particular into mentorship, youth work, getting them to be the next youth workers, because we know we're growing, we're getting older. We need the younger generation now to come through and be trained up as the next generation of youth workers that we need to see out there kind of fighting the fight that we're fighting for as well. So I think having young Black boys and that youth engagement is so important. And I really, really want to have those conversations more with people. So get in touch with me. My social media and all that's there. I could talk all day long about community work and some of the great stuff that happened within the UK and all the rest of it. But I'm just I'm just really cautious of time. So get in touch with me. I want to talk to people. Anything community education, I'm really keen on that. So I really want to talk to people and catch up about how we can really have those strong youth engagement, especially with our Black boys within the local community. And I'm going to leave it there because I'm just getting passionate, as you can see.
Thank you, Keyboy. Thank you. It's never an easy job going last when we're running out of time and having to speed through it and being a topic like this that we're also passionate about and can talk on forever. But thank you for showing that passion. Thank you for talking about your experiences and youth engagement. Like you say, I mean, I say all the time in my school, you know, the work we do in schools is just that. It's the work we do in schools. As soon as the young people leave school, what is there for them? What is there for them? And that youth work that you talk about and having a community, you know, a village behind them, people that care for them outside of the education system is crucial. So thank you for that, Keyboy. Ladies, gents, it's been a long evening. Thank you for staying with us. Even though we've gone over slightly, it's been a pleasure to share this space to begin some of this discussion. I'm hoping that everyone's able to take something away for your respective roles, whether it's in mentorship, whether it's in youth work, whether it's in schools, whether it's as a parent, whether it's as a brother, whether it's as a auntie, uncle. I'm hoping everyone's got some food for thought, something to take away in action. There's a question here, just as I think I saw it earlier on, but it was, as a charity, what kind of engaging activities can be done from respite away from the education system, the school system, to support the wellness of young Black boys? Stay connected with BMT. All right, so that is one thing that you can do. We offer our Bridge Mentorship Program. It's a free mentorship program for boys from year 11 upwards. And the whole point of that is giving them something away from their school system, right? So we focus on their academics, we focus on their social development. We offer revision conferences, tuition in some respect. And also social activities so that they can be themselves, so that they can connect with other Black boys and be around Black male role models and a community that cares for them, right? So stay connected with BMT for various opportunities in terms of that, you know, the supplementary school that Ziggy was speaking about. Engaging in things before it's too late, being proactive in building that community for your child, for the young people around you is so important. But I'm not going to keep waffling on. We can talk about some of the great things. Stay connected. Hopefully you can scan the QR code and stay connected. Look out for the series. We are developing a series on this whole building a community around our Black boys. And I know we specify Black boys because that's what's pertinent to us. We understand that Black girls are just as important, and that's a topic of conversation as well. You know, our Black girls in the community and how we also support them. All right, but thank you for joining us this evening. Stay connected with us via social media, via our website. You're able to drop any inquiries or questions. I know there's been a few questions in the chat that we haven't necessarily been able to get to. I've tried to take a picture of some. Obviously, the session's recorded, so hopefully I can get some of those questions and we can look to address those in future events. But thank you once again to all our speakers. Thank you to everyone that attended. I know it's long, busy days. Thank you for giving your time this evening to add to this discussion and be a part of the BMT community around Black boys.
Thank you.